Continuing on our Sutta explorations today, as we cover this time the very important subject of nourishment. In Pali, the word is Āhāra. Sometimes in English it's translated as nutriment, but the way I like to translate it is as nourishment. It's a very important aspect of Lord Buddha's teaching, as we will see in this sutta, and it's a very well known, at least a portion of it is very well known, oftentimes referred to as the son's flesh, or eating one's own child, in a sense. Having said that, in no way, shape, or form will you find this sutta, or in any way, in any of the 84,000 teachings of Lord Buddha, any kind of justification for cannibalism or eating of human flesh, so that listeners could be aware of that. But Lord Buddha was known for his excellent ways of trying to grab the attention of the listener. Whether it was in the Metta Sutta, the sutta on loving kindness, where Lord Buddha is trying to inculcate in us the ability to be like a loving mother towards one's only son, one's only child. How would you treat that child of yours, knowing that he or she is the only one you have? This is very important for especially us in this time period, where people have become so numb to feeling metta, and we become jaded. So the suttas especially are full of imagery and metaphors, analogies that Lord Buddha uses to shock us into reality. So just like as I was saying about the Metta Sutta, what is to be done to bring up the sense of benevolent, universal, loving kindness towards all beings? Can you treat others the way a loving mother would to her only child? That's a powerful image. In this case, we're going to see, I would like you to have that in the back of your mind, that image, as we go exploring the Puttamaṁsa Sutta, which is the son's flesh. The son's flesh, their meat, their body. Because it's a completely opposite of what the image was, the first image. And we'll see why Lord Buddha is trying to jolt the awareness of the listener. And we've seen these metaphors in different ways. And Lord Buddha, he was known for never holding back from shaking people up to get the point across. So that's another reason why today's Buddhist world, or even just, academic circles or intelligentsia, they will not appreciate the straightforwardness of Lord Buddha's, because we've become very neutered. We're afraid of speaking out what needs to be said. There's a lot of black and white that is completely pushed over for the sake of presenting a gray image. Oh, it could be anything. That's very postmodernist, very narrative It could be your narrative, sure, it could be mine, but we can live together. That has no place in the Dhamma at all. Unfortunately, in the world of Buddhist scholarship, and specifically with Dhamma teachers, and especially monks, bhikkhus, and how Westerners, namely, you see this fault again and again, this sense of inclusivity. So, because none of these bhikkhus would ever be able to come up with a metaphor like this, it just doesn't work with their own worldview anymore. So this highly unique discourse, where Lord Buddha again masterfully uses imagery to bring us back to reality, and what matters the most in his depiction of the one and only Son's flesh, is a powerful simile, because it shows the grisliness, if you will, the shock value that it has in bringing up in us the sense of samvega, the urgency, the sense of urgency, which is lacking in the world of meditation today. There's a reason why a person went forth or goes forth even this day in becoming a monk, in walking away from even if you're not becoming a monk, but that attitude of going forth, habbaja. A layperson can maintain that attitude in one's own life, because what this is going to inculcate, bring up within the person, thanks to samvega, the sense of urgency, that sense of spiritual disenchantment, nibbida, which is an absolute must for there to be awakening, for there to be the actual tasting of truth. Nibbida is a sense of revulsion or repugnance towards things that we just love to have. We cannot see ourselves without, in a sense. But essentially, sooner or later, we realize that we have been disappointed again and again and again by those things that we so cherish. So this sutta is trying to cut the time factor for us. It's trying to give us a shortcut. Instead of having to wait until the end of your life, when you really become disenchanted by certain things because your body's failing, and instead to just look at life now and see what you could do in changing your attitude. Because it creates a chain of events in the mind. In essence, it's a chain reaction that forces the brain to look at this thing that I'm cherishing, that I adore so much, and taking a step back and looking at it from a different perspective. So what I'm mentioning here, what I'm trying to say is to separate that sense of identification from the experience, the genuine experiencing of the thing that you are making contact with. So it's not just a matter of sitting and meditating for an hour and that's it, or, oh, we practice, or we go on a retreat. All that is fine and dandy, but ultimately means nothing if it's not changing my approach to how I view the experiencing of my life. And that's what it's after. The Dhamma is after generating within us this sense of urgency to understand that all things will pass. Last week I was talking about the importance of seeing wrong view for what it is, because we look at something that is impermanent but try to capture a sense of permanency out of that. Despite the impermanency, I'm trying to fight it to create something that is permanent. Despite the fact that there is unpleasantness or pain, I'm trying to create some pleasure out of it. Despite the fact that we were talking about the human body, it being ultimately repugnant in a sense. Like if you don't wash the body consistently, if you don't feed it, if you don't take care of it, it's a sad scenario, what you'll be ending up with. Yet we try to make it beautiful. So all these things are ways of trying to capture something that cannot be captured. That craving. So urgency puts you face to face with life. Before you're hit with the facts of life, once all is said and done and the body's failed, the mind is failing, and one is on their way out, and they have behind them a whole series of actions that have been unwholesome. Bad choices were made and opportunities wasted. Now, what I would like you to also think about as I'm going over the sutta in a minute is that Lord Buddha was talking to bhikkhus. And especially types of, what was happening is Lord Buddha began to notice within the bhikkhus, the monastics, the sense of entitlement coming up. Not only that, but they were really enjoying the food they were eating. They were really cherishing, gobbling it up. And Lord Buddha took that as an opportunity to teach them this sutta. So I'll come back to that in a second, but basically, again, this is from the Samyutta Nikāya, the Connected Discourses, Sutta number 12.63, Nidana Vagga Samyutta, the group of connected discourses dealing with causation. And again, therefore it's from the Nidana Samyutta, from the Mahavagga, or the great subsection, and the sutta's name is Puttamaṁsa Sutta, the sun's flesh. Sutta number 12.63, SN 12.63. So let's begin. While living in Savatthi, the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus by saying, Bhikkhus, there are these 4 types of nourishment that are necessary to maintain the health of sentient beings who are already alive, and for the assistance and support of those other beings who are yet to be born. So he's talking about 2 groups of beings, one that are alive and those that are yet to be born. So this is a nourishment pertaining to those 2 populations, if you will. Now, what are these 4? The nourishment of edible food that is consumed, whether rough or fine, solid or liquid, coarse or refined. Secondly, there is the nourishment of contact. Now, this is something that in Western philosophy, we never come across something like this. Well, how could contact be a nourishment? Not just Western, but even in Asian philosophies, this was unheard of. Contact. Thirdly, there is the nourishment of intentional thinking. Intentional thinking. And fourthly, there is the nourishment of consciousness or sense awareness. So you see here, it's going to be an interesting talk that Lord Buddha is giving. He was seeing, he was observing, he was watching the bhikkhus as they eat. Not everyone was coming from a genuine place of mindfulness when they were eating. There's a lot of greed, there's a lot of lust. But as the greatest teacher as he was, he looked and he saw that as an opportunity to teach them something. And something very important, and in a way we're very grateful for those bhikkhus to have been behaving like that so that we get this wonderful discourse out. These are the 4 types of nourishment that are necessary to maintain the health of sentient beings who are already alive, and for the assistance and support of those other beings who are yet to be born. Now, bhikkhus, how should the consuming of the nourishment of edible food be understood? This is many people get fixated on this portion of the sutta, and this is what usually is highlighted from this sutta. I mean, even the title says so, but there's more than this first segment of this, the first part of these 4-part series of the sutta. Just as a married couple, a husband and a wife, intending on crossing the desert, take their one and only beloved dear son with them. See, the Lord Buddha is putting all these qualifiers. So you know that they didn't hate the child. Is their one and only child. They love the child. He's dear to them. But they set off on their long journey without having taken sufficient amount of water, food, and supplies along with them. So they have not well prepared themselves. And the first thing you take, if you're ever gone on a journey, water. You need water. But later, after having already traveled a considerable distance, and having crossed halfway into the desert, their limited water, food, and supplies would be used up and completely exhausted. Furthermore, they realize how the rest of the desert still needs to be crossed for them to reach safety. So this is a hypothetical scenario that Lord Buddha is giving. Then the husband and wife reflect. Our limited water, food, and supplies have all been used up and completely exhausted, while the rest of this desert still needs to be crossed for us to reach safety. If we go on like this, all 3 of us will die and perish. The only option we have now is for us to kill our own one and only beloved dear son. Again, this is a hypothetical. This is a story trying to make a point. And they continue. And by flavoring and drying up his flesh, we could carry it with us to feed and sustain us on the way. That way, by eating our beloved son's flesh, we can then cross the rest of this desert. Shocking imagery, shocking possibility that loving parents would do that. In those days, this was unthinkable. 2,600 years ago, even the possibility of, even the hypothetical nature of this question or this scenario would be jolting a person out of their seat, because this is just disgusting, repugnant, terrible. But today, in our humanity, at least in my life, I have seen quite disgusting things happen in the world that I grew up in. When you look at the wars and this and that, not just in wartime history of this humanity during the past, century, we see people doing things, if not like this, but of a similar inhumane, heartless, brutal, and violent nature, and they're on the news. This is another reason why I insist on teaching students metta in this time period, as a way to awaken oneself and help awaken society. Then bhikkhus, imagine that the husband and wife would go ahead and kill their one and only beloved dear son, flavoring and drying up his flesh, which they then carry with them as they cross the rest of the desert. But while they are eating their son's flesh, they would start beating their chests and cry out, Where are you, our one and only son? Where are you, our one and only beloved and dear son? Because he's no longer breathing. They killed their only child. You know, when I was growing up as, Christian family, you read the Bible, and usually that includes, obviously, the Old Testament. And you come across the story of Abraham where he pulls out a knife and is about to sacrifice his own son for this thing called his God, to appease his God, because God has asked him to kill his son. I mean, I went like, what kind of a God is this? This is terrible, unacceptable. I was shocked as a child, even. Like, imagine my dad sacrificing me for this invisible thing. But that infuses such scenarios into the mind of a culture, where in time it might even become, that's not such a foreign idea. This is completely foreign to our human nature. This is not supposed to be there. This is in answer to what I was saying earlier as to how our culture has become so numb to scenarios like this, to stories like this. But in those days in India, this was shocking. You can see some of the monks in your mind like, ooh, churning in their stomach. It's like, oh, the Bhante, oh, child, they ate their own son? They killed their own son? But there's a reason why Lord Buddha is using such a grisly, gruesome image. He's trying to bring the attention of the bhikkhu back to where it's supposed to be when he is eating his alms food. Just to treat the food like the couple would be treating the food as they're eating it. Imagine, it's their son's body, whom they killed. I once was at a monastery. I was still a layman at the time, and I was doing a self-retreat, personal retreat. And I was in the Dhamma hall. I had my eyes closed, but I heard the footsteps of someone who came in, and I could hear food being placed inside of a bowl. And the person sat, and from the sound where it was coming from, the trajectory, I guess, the source of the sound, I knew this was a monastic sitting a few meters away in this direction, actually towards the northeast of where I was sitting. And then I would hear the chewing with the mouth open, and then also I could even sense the ravaging drive to gobble and devour the food with the mouth open, mind you, chewing loudly. And I couldn't, help. Eventually, after the bowl was being wiped, I could hear it and I could know, what was being done. And I lifted my eyes and I saw the person, a monastic. I was obviously, it was not a complimenting situation to be in for the person and for the Sangha. But these are also lessons for us to never become like that, be like that. And we understand now when we're reading this sutta, when we're hearing the sutta, we understand the shake-up that Lord Buddha is trying to do in these bhikkhus. One time I was at a different monastery in a different part of the world. I was a bhikkhu then, and I was sitting and people were, because I had some stomach problem, I couldn't eat the type of food that every day I was eating, and until my stomach couldn't handle it. So some of the laity decided to change because there was not enough protein coming in, and the same, food that was coming in. So they asked me, what would you like, Bhante? And I said, if you could just add some protein, and change just a little bit, because I'm deficient. And so people had brought in, I think it was grilled fish or something, and some lasagna or something. And as I'm eating, I see one of the venerables sitting next to me reach over their body, looking and I could see in their face, it's like, "Are you going to eat all that? And can I have some?" And I said, "Sure." And then they said, "No, no, no. I was just, you can eat it. If you have some left later on, I could eat." But you could see what I saw when I was a kid sitting in the lunchroom at 12 in elementary school, how the other kids would look if I were eating something delicious that my mom had prepared. What is the difference? There needs to be a difference. We're bhikkhus. What is that? You cannot be having yourself, watering at the mouth. This is disgusting. Why did you even go forth? Go eat your good food as a layman. You don't need this. The Lord Buddha saw this, and he gave this powerful image for a reason. We have two parents who love their child who killed the child. So how could they have greed there when they're eating his food? In fact, they would be crying their eyes out, sobbing as they're eating. Now, remember, it's the context. They're in the middle of the desert. They're this, and again, it's a hypothetical. This is not advocating for, killing beings here. So how could they have lusting for more? Oh, let me get the drumstick. Let me get that, the leg. You eat they can't do that. Are you going to eat all that? Can I have some? They can't have that. It's unthinkable. They can't gorge themselves over their only sons, one and only sons, flesh. Now, can I take this with me now in the 26th century? Next time I'm eating, next time I'm doing something, next time something is offered to me. Can I basically lose my mindfulness, my awareness, and just behave like a wild animal? Or have a different position altogether from now on? And if I can, there you go, the first step has been established, has been done. The correct step has been taken because of this sutta's message. Now, what do you think, bhikkhus? Would they be eating that food for pleasure or to enjoy themselves, indulging themselves with it? Or would they eat it so they become attractive or maintain physical beauty? No, Venerable Sir, they would not. Would they not be eating that food only for the sake of supporting themselves as they cross the desert? Yes, Venerable Sir, they would. In just the same manner, bhikkhus, I declare you must relate to food. And in the way you consume the nourishment you get from edible food. For when the nourishment of edible food is fully understood, the noble disciple then sees for certain the binding and fettering that result from lusting after the 5 branches of sensual pleasure. So once you understand the error in our relationship towards the food that we're eating, instead of like, yeah, you can just carry that over to the rest of the 5 senses. The eyes, meaning look how you relate to something that you haven't seen in a while, that you always thought was attractive or beautiful or hard to see. One time I was in Italy as a layman, and I was in a place called, a very famous place, it's called Cinque Terre, and it has 5 cities, coastline cities, and the Italian culture, public being so open, with allowing people to come, and they had just allowed a lot of refugees and from North Africa and places like that, Middle East, to come in and almost, they were living there for free and all that. But they had brought with them their culture also. And this is a problem that I have with opening, without asking any questions or having some criteria being met. You can't just open the doors because rats and things are going to come along with the beautiful things. So you need to have certain boundaries or some protocols set, right? So as I'm walking through this tunnel-like thing that connects the train station with the city, and it has a beautiful cliffside and places where individuals could go into the water. So it's very picturesque. And I hear, because I know Arabic, I hear few like late teens, 17 to 20, 22-year-old young men, Arabic speaking men, rushing by me, pushing through the crowd that's going towards the city. And all of a sudden I realized what they were saying. They were referring to a woman who was practically naked. For them, that's unheard of. That's unseen, because it's a very restrictive, it's a very taboo thing in Islam and in the Arab culture, generally speaking. So here there were like, they're bulldozing through the crowd. And finally, the rest of us get to that side, and I see how they're popping their heads or even going down the cliffs to get closer to these few women, which apparently they were just sunbathing. I didn't look at the other people around me. They were shocked looking at these young men drooling over this or trying to physically approach them, harassing. That's the same thing you could say about gorging yourself, gobbling up the food as if there's no tomorrow, finishing up your bowl as if there's no tomorrow. Well, how is that civilized? We have to talk about these things, instead of hiding them under the carpet. These are things that we're seeing, and we have to talk about it in order for us to remove them from our society. But we don't talk about them anymore. That's why even the sutta probably is not being discussed in Dhamma talks. Hopefully after today it might be. So the lusting, so I just gave you one example of, other than the mouth, the eating, the eyes eating the information. Craving for the sight. Other places you see, you get somewhere. A few months ago, we were at a place called, I think, Three Sisters in Australia, where you have these beautiful cliffs coming out, jutting out, and you have this lovely area where tourists could come. Everybody's rushing to get out of their car to go so that they could snap a selfie in front of these cliffs, fighting to get in to get the better shot. It's the same thing. And once lusting for the 5 branches of sensual pleasure is seen for certain and fully understood for what it is, then there are no more fetters for the noble disciple to become shackled to. You understand this is just food. You understand that's just a body. You understand that's just a sight, cliffs, and there's a sunset. Okay, fine, the light is hitting from a certain angle. It's okay, fine. I can acknowledge it's pleasant, it's lovely, fine. Get over it. It's just contact, which we'll come back to next. Noble disciple to become shackled to, which would have forced him to come back again to this world. So we put so much energy on the food, preparing the food, and at a great price. Not just the money portion, but so much has to be done. The person has to plant the rice, let's say, and they have to get up early, and that's only one stem of the plant. They have to do it countless times. And then it has to be cultivated. You have to shake off the chaff and all that, and then eventually clean it up, this and that. So many hands it has to go through until they enter through your door and come to your kitchen or to the restaurant. And what do? You put it through one door, but it comes out of 9. 9. Lord Buddha uses the 9 orifices, not just one. And that's part of it's found in, I think in Buddha Ghosha, he mentions this this thing from this phrase about food, and I love that, of how he enters through one door, but it leaves out of 9. This was a thing that they would say in Sri Lanka at the time. The food, despite how much effort it took, even though it's eaten with such a big company sometimes. Yes, we're going to have a party. Yes, we're eating together. But how do you empty it out from your body? Are you still sitting with the crowd of people when you're in the bathroom, emptying it out of your body? Or do you do it in secret, in private? You even have to turn on the faucet sometimes so that it doesn't make too much noise and it becomes embarrassing. So you do it in private, you do it in secrecy. You empty your bowels from that food, which was delicious and all that, in secrecy. But when you're eating the food that's so delicious, the way you're looking at it, even when you're looking at the menu, that you're ordering it, and you're waiting, and they take the plate to someone else's table, and then they finally bring it to yours. You look at it, it's like, I'm going to eat that. And then, how is your relationship once it is inside your belly? Well, actually, if you even take a mouthful and then pull it out and look at it, your relationship completely changed, let alone when it's coming out of you. You do it in disgust. You don't hold it, of course. I know I'm being kind of out there. Another level of gruesomeness, I guess, or even saying disgusting, but these are facts. We don't want to have anything to do with it. In fact, Lord Buddha even says about the fingernail. He says, even if when you go to the bathroom and you come out, and if there's a tiny little piece of excrement left after you have gone to the bathroom, wash your hands and come out, what does that do to you? Do you say it's okay? No, it's disgusting. It's as if your whole hand is covered in excrement. It's disgusting. And the same goes with, the preparation of the food. It might take days, it might take hours, and after that, if you leave it outside for one night, one day, what happens? You throw it out. It rottens. It spoils. So it's all conditional. So all of these things are bringing up the sense of repulsiveness. Patikula, it's called. Āhāra patikula sanya, that sense of perception of the ugliness, the repulsive in the nourishment. So now we get to the second nourishment. And how? Because should the nourishment of contact be understood? Just as, bhikkhus, when a cow that has been severely injured and left with an open wound that exposes her flesh and soft tissues inside, usually translators I've come across, they always present it as if it's a skinned cow. And it's not a skinned cow. That's not what the Pali is saying. Imagine a wound. I've seen this in Sri Lanka. I've seen animals that had chewed their skin off to the point where you can see the inside of that part of the body. So yes, it's been skinned, but there's a deep open wound, which is, they're open for all kinds of infections and pain, of course, the itching, intolerable. But it's not the whole cow that has been skinned that Lord Buddha is talking about. That's why I translated like this. And Bhante Nyananda was the one who opened my eyes to this difference, which it's all in the different tiny differences like this, to bring it back to life, for us to become more able to relate with these sceneries and then gain more understanding of the Dhamma through these analogies and metaphors used by Lord Buddha. Just as, because when a cow that has been severely injured and left with an open wound that exposes her flesh and soft tissues inside, if she were to stand or lean against the wall, the ants and other creeping animals dwelling in and on the wall would come eagerly biting and eating at her exposed and fleshy wound. Sometimes we lean against the wall, but in nature for years I would like to go and sit under a tree, but sometimes you would, for some inevitable reason, you start having creepy crawlers all over you, ants and things walking all over you. So even though it's very tempting to lean on the tree because it makes you feel so close, but you have to be aware of these things. Now, there's no wound there in that example. Now imagine if you do have a wound that's open and exposed. Can we relate to contact as this image entails? And Lord Buddha continues, and if she goes and stands against the tree, the animals, I guess I just jumped to that one, the animals dwelling in and on the tree would also come eagerly biting and eating at her exposed and fleshy wound. Or if she goes and immerses herself in a body of water, the animals dwelling in the water would start biting and eating at her exposed and fleshy wound. And if she goes and stands in wide or open spaces, the creatures dwelling in the open air would start biting and eating at her exposed and fleshy wound. So wherever she goes, she's trapped. There's nowhere for her to go to without someone coming and biting at her. Open wound. Emphasis on open. I'm going to come back to that. Open wound. Thus, wherever that cow that has been severely injured and left with an open wound that exposes her flesh and soft tissues inside were to go and stand, animals dwelling there would eagerly start biting and eating at her exposed and fleshy wound. It's all about contact. Remember. Because ultimately, when we talk about any of the sense experiences we're having, the six senses, what we're really talking about is their contact. The eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. Everything starts there. Now, when you add to that factor, remember the open wound I was mentioning just now? Your senses that are completely wide open, unhinged doors, looking at the world and just taking in, absorbing everything that comes, you have not just one, but 6 open wounds, like that cow, exposing you all throughout the time that you live. They're coming in from all of these doors. So can I really afford not to have restraint? No, none of us can. Even as an Arahant, the Arahant maintains restraint throughout until they die. Now, that doesn't mean that the Arahant is susceptible. No, but it's protective. Because they also have a body, you know. They have the khandhas. They need to protect. So when they're walking, they're cognizant. When they see something, if they see a snake, they're going to restrain themselves to turn this way. Or if they see a naked woman, they're going to turn their gaze. Restraint. In just the same manner, bhikkhus, I declare you must relate to the nourishment you get from contact. For when the nourishment of contact is fully understood, the noble disciple then sees for certain the three types of feeling. And remember, we've talked about the three types of feelings extensively in the past. So the pleasurable experience, a feeling, the painful feeling, and the neutral feeling. And by the way, we majority of the time are having neutral feeling. And when you go and say, well, when is that happening? That's the problem. That is the neutral nature of it because you're not aware of it. Perfect example is, do you feel your elbow when it's not touching anything right now, let's say? Or the back of your head if it's not touching something. There you go, neutral feeling. It's neither pleasurable nor painful. Just a very quick example. The three types of feelings have to be understood because they are rooted in contact. Remember, we won't have any of these feelings without contact. That's why it's called the nourishment. So you see now the connection between contact and feelings. What we normally do, however, is we look at the feeling. We completely are oblivious to the fact that there's been contact. Before you got angry, can you trace your steps back? What happened before that? Well, I was doing fine. I was washing the dishes, and then I was even singing to myself. Okay. What happened before that? Well, nothing was happening. But I hate her. Like, okay, before we get to the hating part, what happened? You were washing dishes. Okay. Something happened? Yeah, the phone rang. Okay. What? The phone rang. Okay. And then what did you do? Oh, I picked it up and I started, I picked it up and I picked up the call and my friend was calling. Who? My friend. Okay. And what she said this, I said this, and all of a sudden it blew up in my face and now I'm very angry. I completely pushed away all that took place and I'm just picking up what? My anger, my feeling. Anger is painful feeling, by the way, right? So it's creating chaos within me. There's suffering now. There's pain. Most of us will just pick that piece of charcoal, hot burning charcoal, and say, I'm not happy. I'm in pain. What Lord Buddha is saying, always go back to the thing that irritated, that instigated it, meaning contact. Now, the problem is, I just gave you an example of a painful feeling. We don't like painful feeling. We always we always go after the opposite of that, pleasure. We don't have complaints about pleasure. We only have complaints about pleasure when it dies out, and it will die down. It will disappear. That's where pain comes in. That's why they're the two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other, as the saying goes. But it all starts with contact. So we're very biased in our preferences. And once the three types of feeling are seen for certain and fully understood for what they are, then I declare that there is nothing further left for the noble disciple to do. So if you just understand as to how these feelings arise, then you basically cut the cord. You're not getting involved with the story. You're free. You can continue washing the dishes with a smile. It's not going to jolt you. Or even when you are picking up the phone and the call and you're not listening to what she's saying per se. You're listening and hearing the voice. You're aware of the ear consciousness picking up the voice. But the sanya, the perception, the interpretive quality of the mind that does this thing called manana, it keeps on imagining, it keeps on building things, That's the thing which is flaring us all up inside. So I'm not even hearing her words anymore because I am lost in the volcano that is my feeling bad at that. So I completely lost another opportunity. But fortunately, so long as we're alive, we're always being given situations where there's contact happening, so long as we have these six senses. So next time you're having any kind of experience, see if you could pause the button in your mind by going back to the actual contact point. It completely will free you. Don't take my word for it. Look what the Lord Buddha said. Nothing further is left for the noble disciple to do after that. And how, so this is the third nourishment we're coming to. And how, because should the nourishment of intentional thinking be understood? Here the word in Pali is sancetana, and many times people will use volition or volitional thinking or something. To me, it never did something, that English translation. For me, I like the intentional thinking, because thinking itself is also could be passive. But when you put these two together, something happens, the way I see it, the way I understand it. And that's why I translate it like this. Sancetana as intentional thinking, because we also have the Sankhara khandas, by the way. That's the fourth of the five khandas, which I translate often as habitual tendency. So that is also, in this context, is referring to the kammic volition, the intention that is being propelled by what we are karmically prone to doing. What is our propensity, the drive, the momentum? So these are basic. This is the momentum or the drives that drag us from here to there. When the person comes and says, I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I do this, why I keep doing this. What they're referring to are the sankharas, specifically the sancetana, the momentum. And sometimes these are completely unintentionally done. Unconsciously, shall we say. But the intention is still there because there's a momentum, because there is asati, there is the absence of mindfulness to put the spotlight on this and say, excuse me, what am I doing? I can't allow myself to do that, especially in the context of breaking precepts. Sometimes a person comes and says, Bhante, I don't know why I said those stupid things. I didn't mean to. Yeah, you didn't mean to intentionally. You had decided not to, but you said it because it's on automatic pilot at that moment, because you have trained yourself, because there's a momentum, the propensity I was saying. Intentionally it left, but you were unconscious. The intention itself can be unconscious in that regard, in those circumstances. This is a perfect example of there could be a perfect example within in the arena of addiction. That's why people have to go to like meetings and 12-step programs, similar. I'm not a big advocate of that, but it has some value to it, of course. But when people go to therapy, for example, they talk about these things, they cry, they say, I don't know why I do that. They're not necessarily lying, but they're really struggling. The thing that is missing is sati. That's why Lord Buddha always starts with sati. Even catching that point of contact, I said, who's going to be catching it, quote unquote? Your sati will. And that's why we always start from there. If you don't have sati, you won't be practicing sila. You will be breaking precepts left and right. So sati is not something you just do every once in a while. It's all of your life. And it is responsible, absolutely, for there to be happiness in your life or pain and suffering, unhappiness. Sati is responsible, first and foremost. Imagine, bhikkhus, there being a pit that is filled up with burning hot coals, but without releasing any smoke nor having any flames come out of it. A pit that is deep enough for a full-grown man to be easily engulfed in, from head to toe. Now, imagine there being a man who is desirous of living, who wants to live, wanting to experience happiness and not pain, terrified of death. Then two strong men show up and rush towards him, and by grabbing him with both arms, they drag him towards the burning charcoal pit, wanting to throw him in it. Now, that man's intention is to escape the pit. Of course, who wouldn't be wanting to leave? I mean, you're fighting. His goal and aim would certainly be to simply escape the impending doom by running away from it as far as possible. And why is that? It is because that man would know for certain, if I were to fall into the burning pit, I would most certainly burn and experience terrible pain and a most horrific death. No one will argue that. In just the same manner, bhikkhus, I declare, you must relate to the nourishment you get from intentional thinking. So when I was first reading the sutta some years ago, as a layman, I had a issue with this. Like, how could, because I understood the food part, even some, the contact part, but here the intentional, I mean, even the intentional thinking is the reason why I'm sitting to meditate. So why could that be seen as being thrown into the charcoal pit? So these are natural questions to be asking oneself. But remember the sankharas I was mentioning? You can think of sankharas, the propensity I mentioned, the drives that I mentioned. Ultimately, they keep pulling us left and right. Now, that left could be wholesome, and the right could be unwholesome, or vice versa. It doesn't matter. But the sankharas, we come with bundles of sankharas. By the way, sankhara, the theme, the principle of sankhara is so vast. It has so many derivations within the teachings. So even in the Pali commentators and the compilers of the canon, eventually, in the second, third, etc., councils, especially the commentators, they had to become satisfied with just using, Chaitana in some cases, or Sanchaitana as, the volitional quality of it, the intentional action, because it also has its passive elements. Those are the drives. Those are the things that you seem to not have any control over. But essentially, it can also it does come with wholesome aspects to it, and the unwholesome. Unwholesome, I've talked about so many times. They're the three kilesas: lobha, dosa, moha, greed, hatred or anger, and delusion. Now, in the case of the wholesome one, it is generosity, being generous. It is the quality of kindness, or metta, loving kindness, and also the quality of wanting to learn. So you can even see or say that it has a discerning quality. But nevertheless, these work to perpetuate your existence in samsara. So the pain resulting from falling into the hot charcoal pit is a metaphor for the suffering we experience in the three realms of existence. So we have three realms of existence. Kama loka, where we are. These are the sensual realms. Animals are in there as well. Even a big chunk of the realms in Deva realms, the heavenly realms, fall within that category. Then you have Rupa Loka, which are the form realms. I think I mentioned it last time. And then there's the Arupa Loka, or the formless realms. These are states that one is reborn into with the help of the jhanas, going deep in meditation, absorption. So, sankharas are behind the drive to be reborn, that momentum. And in a minute, I will explain more as more sentences come up. For when the nourishment of intentional thinking is fully understood for what it is, the noble disciple then sees for certain the three types of craving. So now we're seeing the connection between intentional thinking and the three types of craving. And what are the three types of craving? Tanha. Kama tanha, the sense pleasures, craving for after those. Bhava tanha, which is the craving for becoming, existing again, taking another birth. And it doesn't have to be just into another actual birth, rebirth. Yes, it's included, but it could be something like when you want to experience something other than what is happening now. The other. And lastly, the craving for non-existence, or vibhava tanha, it's called. Vibhava is the desire to no longer exist, either of oneself or of the thing that is in front of you, which is another cause of, it's another reference to suffering or dukkha. Because the pain that is in front of us, taking place in us, let's say, we don't like it. We want it gone. That is also craving for non-existent existence of this thing taking place in front of me. When is this headache going to go away? Now, in the case of anyone other than an arahant, all beings are subject to these, including an anagami, because they want to end life. Because if they have not, or they're not reaching that point of final nibbana, every moment is torture. So, being, thinking about a whole spectrum. So it's not just something like basic, vulgar, like, craving for sense pleasures. Let's say it could also be in the range of noble disciples. And once the three types of craving are seen for certain and fully understood for what they are, then I declare that there is nothing further left for the noble disciple to do. Remember, tanha, or craving, is at the root of our intentional thinking, the mano sancetana, or the mental volition, craving. It's craving that even actually that drives us to go and attend this discourse or attend this conference so that I can improve, like self-help even. So they do have, like I was saying about the wholesome aspect of sankharas. So, but ultimately they all have to be relinquished. Otherwise, you're just collecting assets, achievements. And that's a big problem for meditators. They keep comparing, contrasting. Oh, which level are you on? Did you go deep? Oh, did you get to the second jump? Oh, wow. I'm still working through the first jump. Or are you still a stream winner? Did you break free? Did you come into, are you a noble disciple of a third category? What are these things? What are we talking about? Achievements. Or even something of less, exciting nature to it for many people, such as the calm that a person may experience in meditation. Oh, yesterday's sit was amazing, Bhante. Why? Well, because suddenly I was in quiet. I was feeling tranquility. I was in equanimity. Wow. But today it sucks. Why? I couldn't get it there. I couldn't see that. We're treating it as an achievement. Bhante Nyananda calls it assets. We have to relinquish those. We have to become free from those as well. They serve a purpose. We're not throwing them like, throwing the baby with the bathwater. No, we are appreciative of the self-help, if you will, efforts that we're putting in to change our lives, yes, but we ultimately understand that they are conditioned. They are sankata, and nibbana is asankata. It is the unconditioned. So we cannot hold on to the attainments. We cannot hold on to, oh, how come the equanimity is leaving me? Don't go, come. No. You didn't know where it came from. It just is a gift. It's changing you. It's changing you. It's like I've given you the example of my mom would give me the table cleaner, thingy, the duster. But that's when they just had in the 80s the spray for wooden surfaces. And I love the shininess that it would leave behind. So I would just go in with the spray in one hand and the cloth in my other hand, and I would just spray, wash the whole, clean the whole table, and I would just wait. I would just look, and I was like, wait, and I was like, and then all of a sudden my smile would turn into like, no way. Why? Because I would see tiny little pieces of lint and other dust particles coming and landing. So the table, however, is not attached to the brilliant, shiny quality that it had for a brief moment. I wanted it to stay. So what would I do? I would just go and spray it some more, wipe it again, and wait. This time hoping that it would stick. It would remain shiny. And every single time I would feel disappointed. There you go. So, and by the way, you can think of these two aspects of the wholesome, as I mentioned, and the unwholesome drives, which we're calling them the volitions or the intentional thinking, the drive behind them, as those two men coming to grab hold of you and throwing you into the pit. We're always, and what is the pit? Rebirth. It's leading to that drive to get more experiences, more and more. So the wholesome could be something as lofty as generous, because it can turn into a habit. This week I was speaking with some students about giving donations. And they give a lot of donations to this temple, that temple, this temple, and I just put some question marks on them. Would it make a difference if one temple is bigger than the other? If one temple has more monks than the other? And guess what? The answer is, because they didn't come up with these answers. They were told by monks, yes, in order for you to really have your donation matter, it has to have the temple, it has to be a temple, it has to have at least 5 monks. Anything less, it doesn't count as Sangha. Idiotic statement. Completely based on greed. Yes, we have to have 5-member Sangha, fully ordained bhikkhus for certain events, such as ordination of another bhikkhu. But dana can be given any time. But if the person is geared, is programmed into just like, that's their way of understanding that their practice, dana. That is part of sankharas now. Even though on the surface it's something good, wholesome. So we have to really do some probing. Because ultimately what these sankharas are doing is they're exciting us for newer experiences. It's very engaging. In a sense, it's providing us with endless drives for us to be excited. And that's another reason why meditation, which is, by the way, the opposite of creating excitement, the reduction of these tendencies is usually seen as something very boring. That's why people are ingenious and creative. Even when they go to a retreat, they come up with, oh, Let me ask the teacher about this. Let me ask the teacher about that. What are you doing? You're actually adding more excitement because it is boring. The mind is used to noise. At least give me some noise. Yeah, spiritual noise. Sure, I'm good with that. Go ahead. Oh yeah, the 7 factors of awakening, new principles, this and that, and now I can debate with all noise. Dhamma, in fact. On the surface, it looks like very much Dhamma, but it's not. So proper meditation, when you're going deep, relinquishes all of these things, because what you're doing essentially through the proper meditation practice, through the understanding, is by relinquishing these tendencies, you run away from the charcoal pit. That's what you're doing. Not to add another exciting chapter to your life. That's why everybody wants to become a teacher of meditation or become a bhikkhu these days for some reason, and become a teacher very quickly without having the experience or the background. So being bored is what leads that person by both arms to be tossed into the hot charcoal pit. So long as we're seeking after this and after that and after this. So next time you're watching your eyes. By the way, do you see the connection between the contact and this one? They're very much related. Every time you reach over to look at your phone, to watch to see if you've actually gotten a text or what your social media feed is giving you, you're going to the pit. Every time you're looking over to find what's the news over there, or what's the score on the game, you're going into the pit. Then we get to the number 4. And how, bhikkhus, should the nourishment of consciousness or sense awareness be understood? Imagine, bhikkhus, the king's guards capture a bandit red-handed, a criminal, while engaging in some criminal activity. Now imagine the arrested criminal is brought to the king, where the guards exclaim, "Lord, we caught this criminal red-handed while engaging in criminal activity. Sir," or sire, "you may now do with him whatever you like by giving him whatever punishment you please." The king then would command them by saying, "Guards, take this man outside in the morning, take them outside in the morning and throw 100 spears at him." And the guards do as they are told. Imagine 100 spears being thrown at you. Later, when the king, and by the way, it hurts more than an arrow does. So there's an intention there behind the usage of these imagery, of course, by Lord Buddha. Later, when the king asks them what happened, the guards inform him that the man is still alive. The king then instructs them, "Guards, take that man outside and again throw 100 spears at him in the afternoon." And the guards do as they are told. Afterwards, when the king asks them and as to what happened, the guards inform him again that the man is still alive somehow. Again, this is a hypothetical. The king then instructs them, "Guards, continue now in the evening, throwing 100 spears at him." And the guards do as they are told. Now, what do you think, bhikkhus? Would that man be experiencing much pain and suffering from being struck by 300 spears thrown at him throughout that single day? Yes, Venerable Sir. He certainly would experience much pain and suffering from being struck by a single spear thrown at him, let alone 300 spears being thrown at him throughout a single day. In just the same manner, bhikkhus, I declare you must relate to the nourishment you get from consciousness or sense awareness. For when the nourishment of consciousness or sense awareness is fully understood for what it is, the noble disciple then sees for certain nama rupa, which is mentality and materiality, or name and form. Because remember, they lean against each other. There's another sutta that I did record some time ago. The reeds, the bundles of reeds. So I'll cover that with you. I think it's in Pali. It's Nalakalapi Sutta, yes, between Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahakotita. So it also talks beautifully about this dichotomy or dilemma, if you will, of consciousness and name and form leaning against each other. If you remove one, the other falls. So which one starts? Which one is responsible for the other? It cannot be just one. They're both leaning against each other. You need one for the other. By the way, here in the metaphor of the king itself is representing our kamma vipaka, if you will, the outcome of our kamma. So it's not an actual king, it is our actions, the consequences of our actions that we are now responding to, have to answer to, rather. And the criminal being caught red-handed is the author of that kamma, us. While the 300 spears being thrown at us are none other than our longing for re-becoming, to obtain a rebirth. In other words, rebirth consciousness, the wanting to be reborn, the desire. Someone was asking me the other day about rebirth. It's a very, it requires a long, explanation. However, if you can just think of it in a nutshell, that there's this arrow that the person who's about to die, very, depends on how evolved they are in their practice. If they're not, the string has it's a very taut, very, very powerful string with a strong drawstring. So if you let go, it's going to take you to another birth. That craving for re-becoming, that is that. You can think of it like that. And then your kammic vipaka, they're going to come and greet you when that arrow lands. Now, when it's, that consciousness, that rebirth consciousness, vijnana, needs to have nama rupa in order for it to become a complete picture. That's why during the conception of an embryo, let's say, in the embryo, when you have an egg and a sperm coming together, you need to have both in order for there to be a completion. Even if you had it at that time, there could be a miscarriage. Because without the vijnana, without the consciousness, the nama rupa, which is forming, is not going to do much. It's going to come out with the body, with the rest of the liquids. Or it's going to be born as a stillborn. So they need to be there, nicely balanced. And when you have that already, you also have, with that combination, the karma, hence the king. Meanwhile, when you're born, so the experiences then you're having once you're born, those are the spears striking you. 300, it's actually more than 300. If you've ever lived more than a day, they're not 300. So these are presenting us with, this is a very heavy sutta, by the way, in case you couldn't tell by now. But it's a wonderful sutta because it takes us deep, and the principles are so tightly packed, and I tried unpacking them. And I can only do, what I can, but there's so much more, and your practice And you going back to the sutta and reading it yourself and listening to it and sitting with this in meditation is really going to help you, especially though when you're applying its principles, when you're observing these 4 nourishments throughout your day. That's when the Dhamma becomes alive. That's why the Dhamma is not about just sitting meditation. And finally, the end of the sutta says, and once Namarupa, or mentality, materiality, name and form, are seen for certain and fully understood for what they are, then I declare that there is nothing further left for the noble disciple to do. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So I hope this sutta really shakes things up in a good way and allows us to really have a different appreciation. Something from something as superficial as just food that we eat. Can I change my relationship to that when I'm eating? And it doesn't mean that you have to stay with like mindfulness all throughout the eating, during lunch. If you can, that's wonderful, but we're working towards that. If that's the approach, that's healthy. So you come in, the sati can come in and out, and that's wonderful. Just doing that as much as you can, you're building the muscles of wisdom. You're building a better and better understanding, and most importantly, you're creating that division in this absolute blind faith that we have in identifying with our experience. Even the Arahant, even they don't have any identification with the state of Nibbana. Venerable Sariputta explains this beautifully when he saw, right at that moment of his own awakening, when he was still not an Arahant, he looked at Lord Buddha teaching this layperson who happened to be a nephew of Venerable Sariputta's, by the way. And he saw, as he was fanning Lord Buddha, Venerable Sariputta was fanning him, and it was hot. And he saw how suddenly there was a breakthrough. He saw how Lord Buddha was not even attached to the Dhamma. He was not identified with the Dhamma. The king of the Dhamma was not identified with the Dhamma. Suddenly, Venerable Sariputta has the biggest aha moment of his life. And he has the breakthrough because he no longer becomes identified with his attainments thus far, with the identification that I have to attain Nibbana. He has the breakthrough. He let go. He allowed, but with sati throughout. So I hope this today's discourse helps you in your practice, in your progress. And I'll see if there's any questions. All right. And glad because I'm going to rush for lunch before it's too late. So let's do the transfer of nerds. Ākāsatthā ca bhūmatā devānāga mahidika punyantang anumoditvā cirang rakhantu lokasāsanam. Ākāsatthā ca bhūmatā devānāga mahidika punyantang anumoditvā cirang rakhantu desanam. Ākāsatthā ca bhūmatā devānāga mahidika punyantang anumoditvā cirang rakhantu mam paranti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you all be well. May the grace and wonderful qualities of the Dhamma continue showering on you and your loved ones in your heart. May the blessings stay and prosper, grow, just not with you only, but to everyone who you think of. Those who are present in this physical body still and those who are not anymore. And may your practice grow, and may you attain Nibbana Supreme as Lord Buddha says, diteva dhamme, in this very birth, right here and now. We don't delay. Nibbana is not out there. In this very life, in this very body, say to yourself, in this very body, in this wrinkly old, bag of bones, I want to attain final Nibbana. May it be so. Sukhi Hotu.